On a cold February morning in the year 2001, in a small Iowa community where neighbors knew each other's names and front doors rarely needed locks, a young woman named Jill LaBrash stepped out of her apartment to start her shift at the local diner. She was 23 years old, with auburn hair that fell past her shoulders and a smile that regulars at the restaurant looked forward to seeing. She never made it to work that day. Her car was found hours later in the parking lot of a shopping center, keys still in the ignition, engine cold, driver's seat pushed back farther than Jill's 5'3" frame would have required. Inside the vehicle, investigators found her purse, her wallet with cash intact, and a half-finished cup of coffee still sitting in the cup holder. What they did not find was Jill. For 23 years, her family would wake each morning to the same question that haunted that first terrible day. Where did she go, and who took her there? The town of Mason City sits in the northern reaches of Iowa, a place where the prairie meets clusters of oak and maple, where winter arrives early and stays late, and where the population of just under 30,000 souls creates the kind of community where a missing person becomes everyone's emergency. In February of 2001, the landscape was locked in the grip of that particular Midwestern cold that makes breath visible and car engines reluctant. Ice clung to power lines. Snowdrifts formed against the sides of buildings. The sky held that flat gray quality that makes it impossible to tell morning from afternoon. Jill LaBrash had lived in Mason City for less than a year. She had moved there from a smaller town to the west, seeking work and a fresh start after a relationship had ended badly. She had found an apartment on the second floor of a converted house on North Federal Avenue, a modest place with creaking floors and radiators that clanked through the night. She worked the morning shift at Betty's Diner on South Federal, a local establishment known for strong coffee and breakfast platters that kept farmers and factory workers fueled through their days. Jill was saving money. She talked about maybe taking classes at the community college. She called her mother every Sunday evening without fail. On the morning of February 14th, Valentine's Day, Jill's alarm clock went off at 5 in the morning. Her shift started at 6. The diner was a 12-minute drive from her apartment. Those who knew her routine said she was never late, that she took pride in being reliable, that her manager had commented more than once on her punctuality. Jill showered, dressed in her uniform, black pants, and a white button-down shirt with the diner's logo embroidered on the pocket. She made coffee in the small pot in her kitchen. She gathered her keys, her purse, her winter coat. The temperature outside was 7 degrees. The sun had not yet risen. At approximately 5:35 in the morning, Jill descended the wooden stairs from her apartment to the small parking area behind the building. Her car, a 1997 Honda Civic, pale blue with a small dent in the rear bumper, was covered in a thin layer of frost. Neighbors later recalled hearing an engine start around that time. One woman who lived in the apartment below Jill's remembered the sound because she had been awake, feeding her infant son, and had thought to herself that Jill was running a few minutes earlier than usual. Clear's throat. What happened in the next hour would become the subject of speculation, investigation, and eventually a cold case file that would gather dust in the Cerro Gordo County Sheriff's Office for more than 2 decades. Jill did not arrive at Betty's Diner. At 6:15, when she had not appeared and had not called, her manager tried her home phone. No answer. He tried again at 6:30. Again, no answer. By 7 o'clock, he called Jill's emergency contact, her mother, who lived 2 hours away in Waterloo. Jill's mother, Patricia LaBrash, felt the immediate punch of worry that mothers know. She tried calling her daughter. No answer. She called the apartment building's landlord. He agreed to check Jill's apartment. He knocked. No response. He used his key, The apartment was empty, everything appeared normal. The coffee pot was still warm. Patricia Labrash called the Mason City Police Department at 7:45 that morning. The officer who took her call was professional but explained that an adult missing for less than 2 hours did not constitute an emergency. People oversleep. Cars break down. Misunderstandings happen. Patricia insisted something was wrong. Her daughter would never miss work without calling. She would never ignore her phone. The officer said they would look into it. At 9:20 that morning, a patrol officer spotted Jill's Honda Civic in the parking lot of Southbridge Mall, a shopping center on the south side of Mason City. The mall had not yet opened. The lot was mostly empty. The car was parked near the rear entrance, far from any stores, in a spot that would have been unnecessary at that early hour. The officer approached the vehicle. The doors were locked. He looked inside. He saw the purse, the wallet, the coffee cup. He called it in. By 10 o'clock, the parking lot was cordoned off with yellow tape. Detectives arrived. The car was photographed from every angle before anyone touched it. When they finally opened the door, using tools to pop the lock without damaging the mechanism, they found everything just as the patrol officer had described. Jill's driver's license was in the wallet, $63 in cash, credit cards, a photo of her mother. The keys were in the ignition, turned to the off position. The coffee cup was from a gas station, not from her apartment. The receipt was still in the cup holder. She had purchased the coffee at 6:12 that morning at a station 3 blocks from her apartment. Clear as throat. She had been alive and moving through the world at 6:12. Somewhere between that gas station and this parking lot, she had vanished. The driver's seat was pushed back. Jill was a small woman. The seat position suggested someone taller had been driving or had been sitting in the driver's seat after she had. There were no signs of struggle inside the vehicle. No blood. No torn fabric. Nothing disturbed. It was as though she had simply stepped out and walked away, except her purse was there, her keys were there, and Jill Labrash was not the kind of person to walk away from her life without her wallet. Detectives pulled video footage from the gas station where she had bought the coffee. The timestamp showed her at the counter at 6:11. She was alone. She smiled at the clerk. She paid in cash. She left. The gas station camera did not cover the parking area. There was no footage of her getting into her car or leaving. The mall had security cameras, but they were focused on the entrances to the building, not the parking lot. The angle that might have captured Jill's car was blocked by a delivery truck that had been parked in that section of the lot the previous day and had not been moved until after 8 in the morning. For those who have ever wondered how someone can disappear in a world full of cameras and witnesses, it often comes down to these small, mundane coincidences. A truck parked in the wrong place. A camera pointed 3 feet to the left. A 2-minute gap in a timeline. By noon, search teams were forming. Volunteers spread out across Mason City. They checked dumpsters, alleyways, fields beyond the town limits. Police dogs were brought in. The dogs tracked a scent from Jill's car to the edge of the parking lot, then lost it near the road. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the frozen landscape. Divers prepared to search the Winnebago River, though the water was partially frozen and the likelihood of finding anything seemed remote. Jill's photograph was distributed to every news outlet in the state. Her face appeared on the evening broadcasts. Missing person flyers went up on telephone poles, in store windows, at rest stops along the interstate. Patricia Labrash arrived in Mason City before sunset. She stood in the parking lot where her daughter's car had been found, her arms wrapped around herself, her breath coming in clouds of vapor. She told reporters that Jill had been happy. Jill had been looking forward to spring. Jill had mentioned wanting to visit home the following weekend. Jill would never leave without telling her. Never. As the first day became the first night, the temperature dropped to below 0. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. The search teams continued into the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the swirling white. They found nothing. No trace. No clue. Just the car, the purse, the coffee cup, and a silence that grew louder with every passing hour. Part 2. The Investigation. The Cerro Gordo County Sheriff's Office took over the investigation on the second day, coordinating with the Mason City Police Department and bringing in additional resources from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. Lead detective on the case was a man named Robert Hanning, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for thoroughness and a quiet manner that put witnesses at ease. He assembled a team of 6 investigators. They began at the beginning. The search operation expanded. By the end of the first week, more than 300 volunteers had participated. They walked in lines through fields, pushed through snow-covered brush along creek beds, knocked on doors in neighborhoods miles from where Jill's car had been found. The Iowa State Patrol issued alerts across the region. Truck drivers were asked to watch for any sign of her. Bus stations and train depots received her photograph. For those who have ever watched a community mobilize around a tragedy, there is something both beautiful and heartbreaking in the effort. Strangers gave their time, their energy, their hope. The media attention was significant. The case had elements that drew coverage. A young woman, a mysterious disappearance, a holiday morning, no apparent motive. Television stations from Des Moines sent crews. Newspapers ran daily updates. The story spread beyond Iowa. Tips came in from across the country. Every single one was followed up. Every call was logged and investigated. Most led nowhere. A woman in Missouri claimed she had seen someone matching Jill's description at a truck stop. Investigators drove 4 hours to interview witnesses. The woman at the truck stop looked nothing like Jill. A caller from Minnesota reported seeing Jill's car on the highway. The car was a different make and model entirely. Detectives focused on Jill's life, her relationships, her habits. They interviewed her coworkers at the diner. Everyone said the same things. Jill was kind, reliable. She kept to herself mostly but was friendly with customers. She had mentioned an ex-partner from her previous town, someone she had left behind, but she had not seemed worried about him. She had not mentioned any threats or concerns. Her manager provided access to her work schedule, her time card punches, her employment file. Everything was in order, nothing stood out. They interviewed her neighbors at the apartment building. The woman downstairs, the one with the infant, remembered hearing Jill's car start that morning. She could not remember hearing anything unusual before that. No voices, no second vehicle. Another neighbor, an older man who lived on the first floor, said he had seen Jill the evening before. She had been carrying groceries. She had waved. He remembered thinking she looked tired but happy. Investigators pulled Jill's phone records. In 2001, cell phones were less common than they would later become, but Jill had one, a basic model she used primarily for emergencies. The records showed no calls made or received on the morning she disappeared. The last call on her phone had been the previous evening, a 12-minute conversation with her mother. Patricia LaBrache confirmed this. They had talked about normal things: work, the weather, plans for the weekend. Detectives examined Jill's finances. Her bank account showed regular deposits from the diner and modest withdrawals for rent, groceries, gas. There were no large transactions, no unusual activity. Her credit cards had not been used since her disappearance. Her accounts remained untouched. Clear's throat. As the investigation continued, a name began to surface with increasing frequency. A man named Derek Thornton. He was 31 years old, worked as a mechanic at a shop on the east side of Mason City, and had been seen talking to Jill at the diner on several occasions. Coworkers mentioned that Derek had asked Jill out at least twice. She had declined politely both times. One waitress said Derek had seemed disappointed but not angry. Another said he continued to come into the diner regularly, always sitting in Jill's section when she was working. Detectives brought Derek Thornton in for an interview on the 8th day after Jill's disappearance. He came voluntarily. He was cooperative. He said yes, he knew Jill. He had found her attractive and had asked her to dinner. She had said no. He understood. He bore no ill will. He had been disappointed but respectful. They asked where he was on the morning of February 14th. He said he had been home asleep. He lived alone. He had no one to corroborate this. He said he woke around 8, got ready for work, arrived at the shop around 9. His boss confirmed Derek had clocked in at 9:07 that morning. Those who knew him said Derek was quiet, kept to himself, had no history of trouble. He had lived in Mason City his entire life. His mother still lived in town. He attended church occasionally. He paid his bills on time. He had a couple of friends from high school he still saw now and then. Nothing about him raised immediate red flags. But detectives noticed small things. Derek's car, a dark blue Ford pickup truck, had been washed recently. The interior was clean, very clean. When asked about this, Derek said he liked to keep his vehicle tidy. He worked on cars all day. He did not like bringing that mess home with him. Reasonable, but the detectives made note of it. They asked Derek if they could search his home. He agreed. They found nothing. The house was neat, sparsely furnished. His bedroom contained a bed, a dresser, a small television. The kitchen was clean, the bathroom was clean, everything was ordinary. They asked if they could search his truck. Again, he agreed. They found nothing there either. No signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence that Jill had ever been in the vehicle. They took samples anyway, fibers from the seats, dirt from the floor mats. Everything would be sent to the lab. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves that Derek seemed too calm, too cooperative. Most people, when questioned in connection with a disappearance, showed some nervousness, some emotion. Derek was almost serene. He answered every question without hesitation. He maintained eye contact. He never asked for a lawyer. One detective wrote in his notes, "Subject shows unusual composure. No visible signs of stress or concern regarding victim's disappearance." But unusual composure is not evidence of guilt. It is simply unusual. The investigation began to slow. Weeks passed, then months. The media coverage diminished. Volunteers stopped calling to offer their time. The search teams were disbanded. Jill's case remained open, but it moved from active investigation to cold case status. Detectives continued to follow up on tips as they came in, but the tips became fewer and farther between. Derek Thornton was never charged. He was never even named a suspect publicly. There was simply not enough evidence. Patricia LaBrache refused to accept that her daughter was gone. She hired a private investigator. She posted rewards. She gave interviews to any reporter who would listen. She traveled to Mason City every month, walking the streets, showing Jill's photograph to anyone who would look. But the months turned into years, and the years began to pile up like the snow that fell each winter, covering everything, making it harder and harder to see what had been there before. Part 3. The Silence. 5 years after Jill LaBrache disappeared, Patricia LaBrache moved from Waterloo to a smaller town near the Minnesota border. She told friends she could not bear to stay in the house where she had received that first terrible phone call, where she had waited for updates that never brought her daughter home. The new house was smaller, quieter. She kept Jill's room just as it had been, though Jill had never lived there, had never even seen the place. It was a shrine to a daughter frozen in time at 23, forever young, forever missing. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the terrible weight of not knowing, who have lived in the space between hope and grief, the passage of time does not heal. It simply stretches. Each birthday that passes becomes another marker of absence. Each holiday, another empty chair. Patricia aged in those years, not just in the way that all people age, but in the particular way that loss carves into a person. Her hair went gray. Lines appeared around her eyes and mouth. She stopped sleeping through the night. In Mason City, life moved forward. The diner where Jill had worked changed ownership. Betty's became Pete's, then later a coffee shop, and eventually closed altogether. The apartment building where Jill had lived was renovated. New tenants came and went, unaware that a woman had once descended those stairs and never returned. The parking lot at Southbridge Mall was repaved. The stores changed. The mall itself eventually struggled, as malls across America struggled, and several anchor stores closed their doors. Derek Thornton continued working at the mechanic shop. He dated a woman for a while, though the relationship did not last. He moved from his small house to an apartment closer to work. He went on with his life, as people do. Those who knew him said he never talked about Jill, never brought up the investigation, seemed content to let the past stay in the past. But there were others who never forgot. Detectives who had worked the case thought about it. Robert Hanning, the lead investigator, kept a copy of the case file in his office long after he officially retired. He would pull it out sometimes, read through the reports, look at the photographs of Jill's car, her apartment, her face smiling in her driver's license photo. He could not shake the feeling that the answer was there somewhere, buried in the details they had collected. 12 years after Jill disappeared, in 2013, the case received new attention when a documentary crew from a cable network included it in a series about unsolved disappearances in the Midwest. The episode aired on a Friday night in October. Patricia LaBrache appeared on camera, now in her 60s, her voice steady but her eyes hollowed by years of unknowing. The documentary showed footage of Mason City, interviews with former investigators, a recreation of Jill's last known movements. Derek Thornton was mentioned, though not by name, identified only as a person of interest who was never charged. The episode generated new tips. People called in who claimed to have information. One woman said she had been in the mall parking lot that morning in 2001 and had seen a man sitting in a blue truck watching the entrance. She had not thought anything of it at the time. Now, 12 years later, the memory seemed significant. Investigators looked into it. They tried to verify her account. But 12 years was a long time. Memories fade. Details blur. The tip led nowhere concrete. Clears throat. In the summer of 2015, Patricia LaBrache was diagnosed with cancer. She underwent treatment, chemotherapy that left her weak and thin. During one of her hospital stays, she told her sister that she did not fear passing. What she feared was leaving this world without knowing what had happened to her daughter, without being able to bring Jill home, without justice. Her sister held her hand and promised that someone would keep looking, keep fighting. Patricia survived the cancer. She recovered slowly, but the experience changed something in her. She became more insistent, more vocal. She began reaching out to law enforcement agencies again, demanding that the case be reopened, that new technologies be applied, that someone, anyone, do something. In 2018, the Cerro Gordo County Sheriff's Office agreed to take another look at the case. Advances in forensic technology had made it possible to analyze evidence in ways that had not been available in 2001. The samples taken from Derek Thornton's truck 17 years earlier were still in storage. They could be retested. New detectives were assigned. The case file was digitized and reviewed. Nothing immediately emerged from the retesting. The fibers from the truck did not match anything from Jill's apartment or car. There was no DNA evidence that placed Jill in Derek's vehicle. But the new team of investigators noticed something in the original reports, something that had been documented but perhaps not fully explored. On the morning Jill disappeared, Derek Thornton had told investigators he woke around 8 and went to work, arriving at 9:07. His truck's odometer reading had been noted during the search. Detectives now pulled maintenance records from the shop where Derek worked. They found that Derek had brought his truck in for an oil change 3 days after Jill disappeared. The mileage recorded at that service was significantly higher than would be expected given his claimed activities that week. Someone had driven that truck more than Derek had accounted for. When confronted with this discrepancy, Derek had an explanation. He said he had driven to visit his mother in a neighboring town. He had not mentioned it before because it had not seemed relevant. His mother was still alive. Investigators contacted her. She was in her 70s now, memory not what it once was. She said yes, Derek visited her often. Did he visit her that week in February 2001? She could not remember specifically. It was so long ago. The investigation stalled again. The odometer discrepancy was interesting but not conclusive. Derek could have driven anywhere for any reason. Without additional evidence, there was nothing to charge him with. Time continued to pass. 2019, 2020. The world changed in ways no one anticipated. A pandemic swept across the globe. Life stopped, then started again differently. In the chaos and fear of those years, cold cases like Jill's seemed to fade even further into the background. But Patricia LaBrache did not forget. She could not forget. She kept calling. She kept writing letters. She kept Jill's name alive. Part 4. The Revelation. In the spring of 2024, 23 years after Jill LaBrache disappeared, a woman named Angela Reeves walked into the Cerro Gordo County Sheriff's office and asked to speak with someone about an old case. Angela was 46 years old. She had lived in Mason City in the early 2000s. She said she had information about the disappearance of Jill LaBrache. The detective who met with Angela, a woman named Sarah Pruitt, listened as Angela explained that she had dated Derek Thornton briefly in 2002, about a year after Jill went missing. The relationship had lasted only a few months. It had not ended well. Derek had become controlling, then verbally harsh. Angela had ended things and moved away from Mason City. She had not thought about Derek in years, had not followed the case, had moved on with her life. But recently, Angela said, she had seen the documentary episode from 2013. It had been recommended to her on a streaming service. She had watched it. When the episode mentioned a person of interest who worked as a mechanic, something had clicked in her memory. She remembered a night when Derek had been drinking, when he had become emotional and strange. He had said something that had frightened her at the time, something she had pushed out of her mind because she had wanted to believe he was just drunk, just upset about their argument. Detective Pruitt asked what he had said. Angela took a breath. She said, "He told me, people think they can just walk away. They think they can say no and that's the end of it. But sometimes people need to learn that no isn't always an option." Pruitt asked if there was more. Angela nodded. She said Derek had talked about a woman who had rejected him. He had not named her, but he had said she was someone from the diner, someone who thought she was better than him. He had said, she learned. She found out what happens when you make someone feel like they don't matter. The words hung in the air between them. Pruitt asked Angela why she had not come forward before. Angela said she had not connected Derek's words to Jill at the time. She had thought he was just being dramatic, just trying to scare her or make himself seem dangerous. She had been young and had not understood what she was hearing. Now, 23 years later, watching the documentary, she understood. Pruitt reopened the case immediately. She brought in the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. They reviewed every piece of evidence collected in 2001 and the years following. They looked again at Derek Thornton. He was now 54 years old. He still worked as a mechanic, though at a different shop. He still lived in Mason City. He had never married. He lived alone. Investigators conducted surveillance. They watched Derek's routines. They built a timeline of his life since 2001. They looked for any other incidents, any other women who might have had troubling interactions with him. They found 2 more women who had dated him over the years. Both described him as initially charming but ultimately controlling and possessive. Both had ended relationships with him abruptly. Neither had experienced violence, but both had felt afraid. In September 2024, Detective Prout and her team decided they had enough to bring Derek Thornton in for another interview. On a Tuesday morning, they arrived at the shop where he worked. Derek was under a car when they called his name. He rolled out, stood up, wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at the badges. He said, "This is about her, isn't it? After all this time." They asked him to come to the station. He agreed. He did not seem surprised. In the interview room, Derek sat across from Prout and another detective. They read him his rights. He waived them. He said he had nothing to hide. They began with the same questions from 2001. Where were you? What did you do? Derek gave the same answers. Home, asleep, then work. Prout brought up the odometer reading, the extra miles. Derek gave the same explanation, visiting his mother. Then Prout mentioned Angela Reeves. She said Angela had come forward. She quoted what Derek had said that night in 2002. Derek's face changed. The calm composure slipped. He looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I never touched her." Prout asked, "But you know what happened to her?" Derek looked up. His eyes were different now. Tired. Older, he said, "I saw her that morning. I followed her. I just wanted to talk to her. I wanted to know why she wouldn't give me a chance. I waited in the parking lot at the mall. I knew she drove past there sometimes. When I saw her car, I pulled in behind her. I parked near her. I got out. I walked over. I just wanted to talk." "What happened?" Prout asked. Derek shook his head. "She got scared. She tried to leave. She dropped her keys. I picked them up. I was just trying to help, but she looked at me like I was a monster. She backed away. She fell, hit her head on the bumper of another car. She went down hard." The room was silent. "I panicked," Derek said. "I didn't know what to do. She wasn't moving. I thought she was gone. I thought everyone would think I did something, so I moved her. I put her in my truck. I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove." "Where did you take her?" Prout asked. Derek told them. He described a location 30 miles north of Mason City, a rural area with fields and abandoned farm buildings. He said he had left her there. He said he had thought about calling for help, about going back, about telling someone, but days passed, then weeks. Then it was too late to say anything without admitting what he had done. So he stayed silent. He tried to forget. He tried to live his life. Prout asked if Jill had still been alive when he left her. Derek said he did not know. He said he had not checked. He said he had been too afraid. On September 26, 2024, Derek Thornton was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter and abuse of a corpse. The news spread through Mason City like a shock wave. Those who had known Derek expressed disbelief. Those who had always suspected him felt vindicated. The community, which had moved on in the way communities do, suddenly remembered the young woman who had vanished on a February morning so long ago. Search teams were dispatched to the location Derek had described. They searched for 3 days. The area had changed in 23 years. Trees had grown, buildings had collapsed, but they found her, or they found what remained. Skeletal remains scattered by weather and animals but identifiable through dental records. Jill Labrache was finally coming home. Patricia Labrache was 74 years old when she received the call. She was in her kitchen making tea when the phone rang. Detective Prout told her they had found Jill. Patricia sat down. She did not cry. She did not scream. She said, thank you for not giving up." The case moved to trial. Derek Thornton pled guilty to reduced charges. He received a sentence of 25 years. At his sentencing hearing, he read a prepared statement. He said, "I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I know I can't give her back. I know I took 23 years from her family. I was a coward. I ran when I should have called for help. I let fear control me. I destroyed lives because I was weak. I hope someday they can forgive me, but I don't expect it. I don't deserve it." Patricia LaBrache did not attend the sentencing. She told reporters she could not bear to see his face. She said, "He took my daughter from me. He took her life, and then he took 23 years of not knowing. That's what I can't forgive. Not just that she's gone, but that he let me suffer all this time wondering." The media coverage was extensive. The case was featured on national news. The documentary that had aired in 2013 produced a follow-up episode. Angela Reeves gave interviews, explaining why she had come forward, hoping her story might encourage others to speak up when something feels wrong. Derek's former co-workers spoke about the man they thought they knew, how he had seemed so ordinary, so normal, how evil is not always loud and obvious. Closing. In a small cemetery outside of Waterloo, Iowa, there is a headstone that now bears Jill LaBrache's name, her dates of birth and passing, and a simple inscription: "Finally home, forever loved." Patricia LaBrache visits the grave every week. She brings flowers, she talks to her daughter. She tells her about the weather, about family news, about small everyday things that Jill missed. Justice came late, but it came. The truth, buried for so long, finally surfaced. And though nothing can restore what was taken, there is something in knowing, something in the end of silence that allows the grieving to breathe again. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.